Good morning and welcome to Rising. I'm Amber Duke, joined remotely by the one and only Jessica Burbank.
And I'm glad to be joined remotely with you today, Amber, the one and only Amber Duke.
All right, what do we have going on today, Jessica?
Well, Amber, CNN's Clarissa Ward offered one of Western media's first attempts to report independently from Gaza since October 7th. Ward and her crew have published new video from a UAE field hospital set up in the south and warning the following is very hard to watch.
As we leave Jenin, Dr. Al-Nakbi comes back with the news of casualties arriving from the strike just 10 minutes earlier.
We just got a stable send right now, 2 amputated young male from the bomb.
From the Qasaf we just heard, from the bomb we just heard?
This is my understanding.
Okay.
They will arrive to our red area.
A man and a 13-year-old boy are wheeled in, both missing limbs, both in a perilous state. What's your name? What's your name? The doctor asks. The notes provided by the paramedics are smeared with blood. A tourniquet improvised with a bandage. Since the field hospital opened less than 2 weeks ago, it has been inundated with patients. 130 of their 150 beds are already full.
Meanwhile, here in the States, News Nation's Chris Cuomo sat for the Israeli government's private showing of footage of crimes committed by Hamas on October 7th. Let's see his reaction.
When a decision is made that Jews are less than human and treated that way in words and deeds, I now know that is exactly the message Hamas sent on purpose, at scale. And I was not aware of that before. I had seen that bodies had been burned, but I did not understand or appreciate how intentional the effort was. They did it methodically. You hear it in the voices, the commands, the ease, the excitement of finding and mutilating victims, being told, let them play with it. Merely murdering innocents was the least of it. Of course, you see that, and you can see that anywhere in the world these days. People pointing weapons, shooting the innocent, shooting people running away, shooting women, shooting the defenseless, people scared out of their minds about what's happening. This was not death from above. It was death in your face, hands-on and personal.
This week, dozens of Biden administration staffers held a candlelight vigil outside the White House, demanding their boss push for a ceasefire in Gaza. However, despite the president's own private admissions that Israel is losing international support over its imprecise and indiscriminate bombing of the Gaza Strip, administration officials confirmed to CNN that Biden has no plans to shift its position and draw any red lines around the transfer of weapons and munitions to Israel. So, Jessica, I understand that people within the Biden administration have an issue with Biden's policy on Israel and outside the administration as well. But I would think as an intern, as a staff member, you're there because you're supposed to be helping to support whatever the administration's policy is. And one of the issues in the Trump administration between 2017 and 2020 was that he had a lot of staff who were not on board with his policies and actively blocked him from implementing some of them. So I think regardless of the justification for what they're doing or whether or not what they're doing they feel is right, it's not their job to be actively protesting someone that they decided to go work for.
Right. What we're brushing up against is one of those moral questions that's been in existence since it feels like the beginning of humanity, which is it fine if you're just following orders, even if you deeply morally disagree with those orders? Is it something that is justified to just say, this is the job that I accepted and it's my duty to do as I am asked? Or do you have to check in with your humanity and say, is this right or wrong? Does it matter if I'm being asked to do something by my superior that I find immoral? I must do it anyway because I'm a soldier, I'm a good employee, whatever. And I think a lot of people are really struggling with that today in the Biden administration, especially in the State Department, because a lot of folks become career staffers in the White House and in government because they feel a duty to do some kind of public service. And I can understand not feeling like it's a public service to support a state like Israel that's currently pushing Palestinians into a piece of land that's the size of Heathrow Airport. There was a trending tweet that was, it's almost as if they are concentrating them into some sort of camp. You have the administration calling Palestinians human animals, that there are no innocents in Palestine, in Gaza. And so I think that's the real moral questioning that a lot of people are grappling with. Is it okay to treat people like that? Or do I just have to do as I am told and support this regime by extension of working in the State Department? And I can imagine being a young person just getting into politics within the last few years, being one of those interns in the State Department, getting into government and public service. And this is what you're tasked with doing, with being the United States, supporting Israel with immense dollars and weapons. I can imagine it being a really difficult task to grapple with those moral questions.
Yeah, I guess I just think at that point you would be better off probably just leaving, because the reality is that these individuals in the State Department and other parts of the administration are unelected, and they are there to support the policy positions of someone who was elected by the American people. And the American populace is split on the Israel-Palestine conflict, so it's not the case that Biden is necessarily going rogue against the people who elected him at this point. And so those staffers are there to support that mission. I wanted to talk as well about Chris Cuomo's reaction to that October 7th Hamas video, because I actually had the opportunity to watch that last week on Thursday as well. That was presented by the Republican Jewish Coalition as well as the Israeli embassy. And I just have to say that it was, frankly, the worst thing I've ever seen in my entire life. And when he talks about the dehumanization, he's not exaggerating. They referred to the people that they killed as dogs, as settlers. They never once referred to them as actual human beings. And there was a video that we watched of people's heads being sawed off with serrated knives and then held up as trophies. There was a man who the Hamas fighters or terrorists, I would posit, tried to actually cut his head off with a garden hoe by repeatedly striking him in the neck. There was a father who died shielding his kids from a grenade, and the children were thrown terrified into the kitchen as a Hamas terrorist took a soda out of the fridge and casually drank it in front of them after killing their father. Untold numbers of burnt bodies. And frankly, there have been people on this program who have denied the sexual assault that occurred on October 7th, claiming that because the Israeli police did not systematically collect rape kits in the aftermath of the attack, that is perhaps evidence that none occurred, that no rape occurred. And if that person were able to see, I think, the number of casualties, the piles of bodies just at that music festival alone, we only got to see 10% of the deaths. I can't imagine requiring or thinking it would at all be feasible for Israeli police to be thinking about putting rape kits on the burned, charred, mutilated, disfigured bodies that they are trying to identify for their families. I think it's important that everyone who has the opportunity to watch that 47-minute tape do so, to understand really what happened on that day.
Yeah, I have a really hard time, trying to process what's going on in Israel and Gaza, to realize that this is what human beings can do. And I think about what Israel has done in Palestine for so long, how they've pushed people out of their homes. Kids who are 5 years old have watched their parents be murdered by Israeli soldiers as they're pushed out of their homes, simply because Israel wants to occupy that land and doesn't want Palestinians on it or living in Israel. And then what does that person grow up to do? You have the mass scale of killing by Israel right now, the death toll being over 20,000, about 7,000 of those plus being children. And that's being done with very sophisticated weapons provided by the U.S. military. And then you have Hamas, which, is the forces that Palestine has to defend itself. They don't have the same weapons that America has. And you wonder what makes a person able to use those weapons in a very personal way. It's much more intimate to kill someone with a knife than with white phosphorus, than with a Tomahawk missile. It's pressing a button versus literally seeing someone die before your very eyes. And I think it's possible because they have watched Israel do this to their families since they were children. What humanity is left in someone that's been forced into a confined space and barely live a free existence thanks to Israel with no parents because they watched their parents be killed before their eyes? That is what breeds the kind of terrorism that we are seeing in the Gaza Strip. And I can imagine the dehumanization comes from Israel directly using the rhetoric that we are fighting human animals, none of them are innocent. And I can imagine they feel that way about Israel because how can you see someone as a human if they treat all of your people like that? And so what's happening is absolutely disgusting. And I think that if Chris Cuomo and members of the media that were shown that footage, they should also be shown footage of the atrocities occurring in Gaza. Many of them have been posted on the internet for people to watch, but children's bodies absolutely burned by Israeli soldiers. They should be forced to watch what Israel has been doing since before October 7th to understand where we are now. It feels very one-sided to have members of the media monologuing about the footage that they've been given by the Israeli embassy before they do a monologue on the footage of what's happening in Gaza, where the death toll is 20 times what was on October 7th.
Well, the footage that was given was recorded by Hamas terrorists on their own cell phones and picked up from CCTV footage. And on this program for weeks, actually months since the conflict started, every single week I've been on here acknowledging the death toll of the Palestinian people and acknowledging that Israel's bombing campaign is not acceptable and acknowledging the horror of what we've seen there. And I just want to hear a single condemnation of what Hamas did on October 7th to at least present that side on this program without a long justification about how cutting people's heads off and then calling the commander about how they need to send pictures immediately because the soldiers are playing with the heads. It's just mind-blowing to me that me talking about watching that video was immediately met with some whataboutism and equivocation.
I think it's because what's happened in Palestine for so long by the hands of Israel has been largely ignored by the American media. And we're in a moment where people are finally talking about the atrocities that are occurring between Israel and Palestine. And most of the time, the conversation is not being had with the context of the greater war at hand, of the occupation of Palestine, of how gruesome it has been for the Palestinian people. And I think it's upsetting when more sympathy is given to one group over another because they're an ally of the United States, or simply because the color of their skin is lighter than the color of Palestinian skin. There have been decades of atrocities that have gone entirely ignored by the media. So I have a very hard time giving airtime to what happened on October 7th and the 47 minutes of footage we have of what occurred that day, when there are years of suffering and silence for the Palestinians. It doesn't sit right with me. And so that's why I think we can talk about both at once. We can talk about how disgusting it is that humanity has come to this. And we can say that perhaps there is a better way forward understanding all of the context at hand.
I think we can talk about both, and we do on this program a lot. We have certainly watched the footage of what's happening in Gaza. I would challenge you, Jessica, to watch what happened on October 7th as well. We'll be back with more Rising next.